1942, President Roosevelt signed into action the first biological warfare program, which would be overseen by the National Academy of Sciences. Its primary aims were to develop biological weapons for military use, should an enemy break international law. Then it was thought that the U.S. needed to be ready to retaliate in kind. The second aim, however, was to explore just how vulnerable the U.S. population and its infrastructure were to a chemical biological attack. The War Research Service was thus created, with George W. Merck of the Merck Pharmaceutical Company leading it. Work on developing new bio and chemical weapons immediately began, though thankfully they were never used. At the end of the war, Merck warned that work on discovering America's vulnerabilities and developing new capabilities to act as a deterrent couldn't be ignored during a time of peace. Merck went on to say it must be continued on a sufficient scale to provide an adequate defense. In 1948, a committee on biological warfare was established and overseen by bacteriologist Ira Baldwin, with one of the first reports determining that the United States was extremely vulnerable to a sneak attack of chemical or biological weapons. This report alarmed the president, who immediately wanted to know just how vulnerable America was. Yet this was something that could only be discovered in one way: a series of open-air tests with real live germs. In order to best simulate a hostile attack with deadly bacteria, the committee decided on the use of Bacillus golvesi and Serratia marcescens, two strains of bacteria believed to be non-pathogenic and relatively harmless to humans. Serratia marcescens had one other major benefit going for it: it would turn food and surfaces it colonized a bright red, making it easier to identify and track its dispersion across a major city. With assurances that the bacteria involved were harmless to humans, the green light was given for the first biological attack on U.S. soil, carried out by the U.S. government itself. On September 20th, 1950, a U.S. Navy vessel steamed across the mouth of the San Francisco Bay. In her hold were millions of gallons of water infested with two strains of bacteria, which was pumped out and vaporized through special nozzles. San Francisco was chosen because of its favorable wind conditions and geography. Wind coming in from the ocean would carry the bacteria across the entire city, exactly the type of thing an enemy would seek to do in a real attack. For 30 minutes, the Navy ship sprayed thousands of gallons of infected water into the morning fog, creating 2-mile-long clouds. Carefully monitoring the time of release, temperature, wind speed, and humidity, U.S. agents then collected samples all across the city, just to see how far the bacteria were spread by the wind itself. For one whole week, September 20th through September 27th, the U.S. government sprayed bacteria into San Francisco, monitoring how widely they were dispersed. Not only were the bacteria used believed to be harmless to humans, but another benefit of both strains of bacteria was their extreme rarity in San Francisco, or even California for that matter. That would make any reports of infections easy to track. With 7 days of spraying, nearly the entire city received 500 particle minutes per liter of air breathed, meaning that almost all of the 800,000 people in San Francisco at the time inhaled 5,000 or more particles per minute during the several hours that the germs remained airborne. The government concluded that a sneak attack using chemical or biological weapons was entirely feasible against an American city, and that such an attack could result in the infection of the majority of the city. The entire exercise had gone off without a hitch. It was a great success in revealing America's vulnerability. Yet, just days after the end of the spraying, trouble began to pop up. A few days after the end of the test, a 75-year-old man named Edward Nevin contracted a urinary tract infection and fell extremely ill. Just a month earlier, he had undergone a successful prostate gland surgery and was well on his way to recovery until the mysterious illness. Running several labs on Nevin, the hospital was shocked to discover Serratia marcescens, an extremely rare bacteria that had never once been recorded in the hospital before. By mid-October, the bacteria had spread to Nevin's heart, and he died. Over the next 6 months, 10 more patients were admitted to the hospital with infections caused by Serratia marcescens, though all 10 would recover. A panic ensued as doctors and researchers tried to discover the cause of this sudden outbreak, fearful of a larger event on the horizon. Yet no source could be identified, and thankfully for the people of San Francisco, the small outbreak seemed to disappear just as mysteriously as it had started. The U.S. government, though, took note of the outbreak, conducting its own 4-man investigation into the matter. Their tests were supposed to help discover the best way to protect people from an attack, not to actually make them sick. General William Creasy spearheaded an effort to reassess the pathogenic nature of Serratia marcescens, and in a 2-page report, the investigators explained that the bacteria was not an ideal simulant, after the San Francisco illness. A bacteria that had previously been thought to be completely harmless had instead been found to be potentially fatal. Yet other government scientists concluded that the bacteria was only fatal in extremely rare circumstances, and only for those with severely weakened immune systems, such as Edward Nevins. They went on to justify its use and continued testing by saying, on the basis of our study, we conclude that Serratia marcescens is so rarely a cause of illness, and the illness resulting is predominantly so trivial, that its use as a simulant should be continued, even over populated areas. Thus, government testing of biological agents would continue for 25 years, all conducted in the dark. It wouldn't be until 1969, when Richard Nixon signed a law banning the testing of biological weapons, that the experiments would stop. Yet the public wouldn't even find out about the testing until the mid-70s. Edward Nevins' grandson would go on to sue the U.S. government over his grandfather's death, though he would lose that lawsuit. A casualty in the U.S.'s eagerness to prepare for the worst-case scenario, the death of Nevin was ultimately the only verified link between severe illness or death and the U.S. government's biological testing on its own cities. And in the eyes of a wary military on guard against an attack on its people by an actual deadly microbe, a price worth paying. Do you think the US and other governments still test weapons on their own populations? Oh, and if you found this video interesting, make sure you watch our other video, Weapons Even the Military Made Illegal. See you.